been very lucky to work with the legend that is Gordon Murray himself. Your only consideration really is performance. Your common goal has now shrunk to making this one car as fast as you can. Just need to quote, I've never seen CFD of the W13. Like, no one can know just by looking at it, but I'm guessing the side pod had nothing to do with their porpoising issues that year. But even I can say, as a Verstappen fan, it's always good to have competition, and I think 2021 proved that. I don't think many people, even yourself potentially, would have minded Verstappen winning that championship, but as long as it was fair and it was a good fight, and it was a really good fight, it's just a shame how it ended.
Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of Georgie's Stripping the Dipping podcast, season 3. I'm your host, F1 Black. Our guest this week, Dan Morris, works for the legendary Gordon Murray. Yes, he of the Brabham BT46 fan car and the most dominant McLaren in Formula 1 history. In today's episode, Dan talks us through the life of an automotive aerodynamicist, and we get the chance to pick his brains on the latest aerodynamic innovations in Formula 1. So without further ado, Dan, welcome to the show.
Hi guys, yeah, thanks for having me on.
Brilliant, lovely to have you. And our listeners will be familiar with this now, but the question we always ask is to introduce yourself. So Dan, how would you introduce who you are and what you do to someone new to you?
Yeah, so I'd probably summarize my work as a automotive aerodynamicist as currently trying to produce the best aerodynamic efficiency for road cars at the moment. And I currently work at Gordon Murray Technologies, which used to be Gordon Murray Design. So I've been very lucky to work with the legend that is Gordon Murray himself.
Maybe the immediate follow-up question: have you worked with the legend Gordon Murray himself? He of the MP4/4, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, fantastic. I presume you're in the UK.
Yeah, that's right. So we're currently based out of Surrey. So very small town in Surrey called Shelford. It's a very nice rural place, very similar to back home. So yeah, it's very nice. Right in the Surrey Hills.
Oh yeah, the Surrey Hills. For those of you listening that aren't from the UK, England is a very interesting place where you can go to places that are extremely flat, and you think that London and its surroundings have basically no topology to them. But if you visit the Surrey Hills, you'll realise that that's mistaken. So Dan, you talked about back home. So where are you from, and can you tell us a bit about your earliest motorsport memories?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Wales. So I've had to move to England for work. I grew up in a very small town in Wales, again in the middle of some big mountains. So the Surrey Hills is very similar. So yeah, my earliest motorsport memory, I'm actually quite different to some of the people you may have had on. So I got into motorsport quite late. So my earliest motorsport memory was actually watching the 2016 Malaysian Grand Prix, Formula 1 Grand Prix, which turned out to be an incredible race. Not for Lewis, unfortunately. But that was my earliest memory. I wasn't really into motorsport as a child. I had no real influences around me for motorsport or cars in general, really. It was a few friends in high school that got me into motorsport in the first place. So it was Formula 1 in 2016 was my earliest memory.
Well, there are often some blockbuster seasons, and I think 2021 now sort of puts some shade on 2016, but at the time it was a real battle, albeit within a team, between Lewis and Nico. And yeah, absolutely, that was the height of drama in Malaysia.
Yes, so, it was a great time to get in.
How did the journey go from sort of discovering a passion for, watching Formula 1 to what you're doing today? You obviously went to university and studied. How did you decide you wanted to do that?
Yeah, that's right. It happened very quickly, to be honest. I've always been into science. I was always interested in maths, physics, etc. So that's what I did at school naturally. But when I discovered Formula 1 and motorsport as a whole, the engineering side naturally became incredibly interesting to me. So the natural route for me was go into university to study motorsport engineering, and that's what I did. So it was 3 years in between discovering motorsport and then going on to wanting to work in motorsport. It happened pretty quick.
I envy people that have that sort of epiphany where they have a real passion or a sense of exactly what they want to do. And I say that as someone that still doesn't know what they want to be when they grow up. But you, I read here that you went to Swansea University and you said you did motorsport engineering. So what did that entail? What's different about that versus perhaps a more traditional engineering degree?
Yeah, so there's not many differences, to be honest. The only real difference is everything that's theoretical that you learn in class is all directed towards cars in some way. So we all learn about mechanical engineering principles, but it's all applied to race cars, which makes it more fun and more engaging. I could never go to school and learn pure mechanical engineering. It's just too dull. It's not applied. Where going down the motorsport route allows you to learn those fundamental principles but apply to something that interests you, and you can it's then finding a job that you love. It's not really a job at the end of the day, and that's what studying motorsport at university felt like. It didn't feel like a chore having to go to class. It was more, I get to go to class and learn about this thing that's really fascinating to me and that I'll then hopefully apply later on in my career.
I mean, that's amazing, and you can hear the passion in your voice reflecting on that period. And you talked about the importance of like tangibility or applying what you're learning to reality. I probably at the other end of the spectrum in that I studied maths, which I enjoyed, but the seeing lectures as an opportunity probably wasn't quite where I was. So when I was at uni, the people that did engineering or mechanical engineering, etc., they participated in something called Formula Student. Did that still exist when you
Mhm.
were at uni, or did you do something like that?
It did exist. Yeah, it did exist. Not at my university, however. I made a choice to go to university that didn't participate in Formula Student to really nail down on my academics in class. And looking back on that, it's a regret of mine, to be completely honest. Many people that I work with now and many people that I know in the industry have learned so much valuable experience and have an incredible CV behind them because of Formula Student. Whereas I didn't really have that luxury. But that was my own choice. I kind of shot myself in the foot a little bit there. And I was also quite unlucky with going to university during the dreaded COVID times. So a lot of what would then be time spent in the workshop or time spent at your computer in the laboratory doing CFD or FEA, etc., probably wouldn't have happened anyway. Um, so I think it was a mixture of myself shooting myself in the foot and also COVID pandemic anyway. So
Well, you sound like a self-deprecating chap, but on the tangent or the subject of going to university during COVID, I definitely reflect on my years in uni as like a huge formative experience, and also just frankly having a lot of fun with my mates. But I don't know, like if I became a lawyer, one of the things I would do is start a class action for anyone that paid full tuition fees and accommodation when they went to university during the
yeah.
pandemic. Certainly in the UK, because it felt like you missed out a bit. Not to make you feel upset, but certainly it cost a lot of money here. So I hope it wasn't too traumatic an experience. And as you say, you got your academic side out of it at least.
Oh, it wasn't traumatic at all. I mean, people have gone through substantially worse than me throughout going through COVID. So I consider myself one of the lucky ones. It's just a bit unfortunate, and I think you're right. People that have paid full tuition during that time, it's not right. You don't get the full university experience. So it is a shame that we all had to pay full tuition, but there's not much we can do about it.
No, I mean, I don't. I feel like I'm raising things that make people linger on the negative. But listen, for those listening that didn't go to university in the UK, Formula Student is essentially a competition where ultimately people that do engineering degrees get together, they design and build a car, and then whoever is presumably the lightest member of the course gets to race it around a course, and they do sort of, as I recall, awards for sort of traversing the course or acceleration or top speed and all those sorts of fantastic things. But listen, you talked about the experience that you could have gotten from that, but of course you're now a professional automotive aerodynamicist. So how did you segue from that experience at university into that professional world? How did you get that opportunity? How was that?
Yeah, lots of hard work. I was yeah, endless amounts of interviews. It's not any weird story that came out of nowhere. I didn't go months without trying and then get this one magical phone call. I just applied anywhere and everywhere that I could, and eventually got an interview at Gordon Murray Design. Went there, did the interview, and got the job. It was as simple as that, really. But it's a lot of graft for anyone coming out of university. It's real hard work. You get an awful lot of no's and not many yeses. And that is also for motorsport as well, not just automotive. It's an extremely hard field to get into.
Certainly the impression that I've gotten, we've on the show had people that are sort of engineers or mechanics or, basically in the paddock, working in motorsport and beyond. And yeah, it does seem like not only the barrier or the bar to entry being like essentially well qualified, but then the number of opportunities versus the number of passionate people that want them, the ratios make it difficult. So you're at Gordon Murray, and you describe yourself as an automotive aerodynamicist. So what does that mean in practice? And you mentioned you're working on road cars. So yeah, what are you thinking about day to day?
Yeah, so day to day, you would get some kind of CAD from a studio. You would then run that in CFD, see what it does, see what kind of aerodynamic fluid you're getting around the car, whether it's positive or negative. You would then feed that back to the people who are creating the car, usually the design studio, feeding back your input, saying you need to tweak this part here, you need to raise this part 10 mil, or lower this part by 20 mil, or can you pull that out a little bit and see what it does? And then we would hopefully get that new CAD, chuck that back into the CFD and see what it does. And hopefully it's a good result. And that tends to be what happens day to day. But there's a lot of management, there's a lot of meetings going on with the rest of engineering, because if you go just yourself and say, I want to make this massive change to the roof, it may be great for aerodynamics, but it may not be feasible for anyone else. So there's a lot of integration that happens throughout a team, and aerodynamics is just one very small part of creating a car from the ground up.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So you know the other people that are in the design team, I guess, are thinking about weight or complexity of design or cost or I guess safety and so on. So you obviously, I think I know some of the acronyms: CAD, CFD. What are for listeners that are coming to engineering for the first time? So CAD is what? Computer aided design or computer aided drawing? What is that? And what's CFD?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
CAD is computer aided design, and that tends to be the software that is the computer equivalent of the old drawing boards you used to see. You see Adrian Newey quite often at his drawing board in his office on the Red Bull PR videos, and it's the equivalent of that, but on a computer, and it's in 3D, not 2D as well. And CFD stands for computational fluid dynamics, and it's essentially a virtual wind tunnel. You can see, you take that CAD, you take that surface, and you put it into CFD and see what it does.
That's a really good description, a sort of virtual wind tunnel. And so I guess you're kind of, I don't know, you're constantly iterating designs until you get to a point where you're all sufficiently content that it does all the things that you need it to do, and has, minimize all the problems that you need to minimize. Does that sound a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, it varies project to project. Your goals could be a certain drag coefficient number for if you're designing a car that's, after a long range target. It tends to be more electrical vehicles that are going after that now. Or you could go for a downforce target. When I was working for on a certain car, we had a pretty high downforce target. We didn't really care that much about drag. So that changes the way that you think about how you want to give your feedback back to the design studio, whether you want to add some vortex generators, whether you want to bring the rear in a little bit to reduce drag. It's your main goal is to optimize around the targets you're given.
I get that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, you talk about drag and downforce, and I'm now thinking, not to out myself too much as a Lewis Hamilton fan, as I probably already have, but designing Formula One cars where, to get the downforce, perhaps they're not efficient, so they have a heck of a lot of drag, and often, well, sometimes you're painstakingly trying to find downforce without increasing the drag too much. Although it sounds like what you said sometimes it doesn't matter. So, why wouldn't it matter in that case that you mentioned?
Well, I mean, arguably, road car aerodynamics can be more regulated than something like Formula One, as you've got, like you said earlier, safety to consider, and the big one is styling. You could bring an idea that looks great on paper and it brings 30 counts of drag, but if it looks ugly, it will never end up on the car. So it's always a compromise between yourself, whether what targets you've got for downforce and drag, or some other aerodynamic target, and what everyone else wants for the vehicle as well, whether that be styling, safety, dynamics, ride handling, etc.
Sounds like my kind of engineering, like that may add downforce, but that just looks kind of ugly. So please go back to the drawing
Yes.
board. That must be a bit frustrating if you're a well-trained engineer, like desperately looking for downforce. I don't know. I'm looking
Yeah,
at the.
it can be
No, go on. Yeah, I can imagine.
frustrating. Yeah.
I'm looking at the website for Gordon Murray Automotive, and because look, I'm a bit of an amateur when it comes to cars that aren't, Ford, Peugeot, Renault, etc. And I can see that
Mhm.
a couple of like prominent models, the T50 is a car that entered production in 2023, and I look at it, and it does look like your kind of sports car, a normal
Yes.
or a special sports car. Is there a sort of unique I don't know, concept or a unique brand that Gordon Murray Automotive is trying to live up to?
Yes and no. The T50 is very publicly based off of the McLaren F1, given that was also Gordon's design. So the T50 is kind of seen as a McLaren F1 predecessor. It's got a lot of the same styling features. It's got a lot of the same targets. It's still a V12, and it's got this incredible power output from this awesome Cosworth V12. That's got an incredible range figure. I think it was upwards of 11,000 RPM, and it's fantastic. It sounds amazing. Um, but then you've got other vehicles like the T33, which is more of a homage back to the 60s cars with a bit more of a comfort styling approach.
I'm looking at the T33, and I suppose like who was it? Was it Taylor Swift? I'm trying to remember. Like these music artists that lose the right to their publishing rights, and so they often re-record their first album and then they sell that version. Maybe that's kind of where Gordon Murray's at. Given that he was huge, the guy behind the McLaren F1. I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a little bit of that. Just wanting to do the McLaren F1 again, but better.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds amazing. Before we sort of move on from this, how do engineers work together? Because clearly, look, if the company is called Gordon Murray Automotive, he's a kind of experienced guy in the engineering and motorsport and automotive world. He has vision for what he wants. But how do you communicate that down a chain or into a group of different engineers? Sort of how do they set, how does the concept of a T33, for example, arrive? You said comfort styling, you said a throwback to the 60s. Like what are the kind of instructions that your team or that you get that enable you to to kick off a design?
Yeah, so luckily I'm at the bottom of that braid change. I'm only a graduate in this large cog, so I only get to see I only get told very broad instructions of make this part better or make this part more efficient. Whereas the people above me would get more directions over that. They may even get a rough sketch from someone very higher up saying we want the car to look like this. You need to make it work and meet all of these other targets. So it's often quite drip fed from the top, as you would imagine. But the whole team aspect is quite hard to manage. The good thing about it is that we've all got a common goal. We all want the car to be successful and for it to be the best that it can. And that's very much a motorsport style of management. Is we're all working towards a common goal, even though all of us have very different roles to play.
A common theme through all the people we interview, because often you think about sort of expertise or even racing or whatever as kind of an individual sport. But it's clearly all of this is that driven down to how well you can and how effectively you can work together as a team. You mentioned that you, well, rather self-deprecatingly as well, you said you're at the bottom of the chain in a small cog. But what is the sort of career progression or the career path that you have your eyes on, or are you quite open-minded as to where you want to go next?
Yeah, I've not got any immediate targets to be honest. I'm very happy where I am, and I'm using this opportunity to develop my own skills as an engineer, but also the soft skills that are extremely necessary in engineering. Ones that you don't get much exposure to in university, so that tends to be the ones that you develop most, especially at the start of your career. Um, I At the end, I would love to work in motorsport in some sense, whether that be Formula One, whether that be working for a world endurance team, whether that be working in IMSA, designing the cars. I have no particular preference over what series, but motorsport is definitely the aim. There's just something about your only consideration really is performance, and that is your common goal has now shrunk to making this one car as fast as you can. And there's just something enthralling about the thought of having your designs on a car that you can see go out track and hopefully do well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, clearly you talked about how you saw that Malaysian Grand Prix in 2016. Even what you just said about, hearing the engine, I think it was of the T50 that you mentioned, like there's clearly something there that's sort of passionate about the roar of the car going, and performance and going around the track. So, I mean, for me, the easiest sort of entry level understanding or being able to, the visibility of aerodynamics, I suppose, in motorsport is in Formula One because there are so many aero parts.
Mhm.
Have you been following testing? How much do you keep up with Formula One these days?
Unfortunately, a lot less than what I used to. I must admit the Max Verstappen dominance has gotten to me a little bit. My general interest is down, as I think a lot of people's are. But that's natural. I think it happened during the Hamilton era, um, and depending on how dominant the years to come are from Verstappen. To be honest, I don't see it slowing down much after seeing the RB20 and seeing what it's been doing in preseason. Um, I can only see the general interest of Formula One going down, unfortunately. I have been following testing very loosely. Some very different concepts, which is exciting, even a few years into this rule set. So it's been great to see what different teams have come up with. And the good thing about Formula One is, like you were saying, aerodynamics is king, and often they will sacrifice suspension performance to get ultimate ride control, for instance. So Formula One is a great way to look at something because it will be the best that you can do within those regulations for a certain team, obviously. There's obviously developments and everything could be better, but it's better to look at a Formula One car to see things relating to high performance aerodynamics than there is to a road car. There's less compromises. The only compromise you've got in Formula One is the regulations.
If you choose to follow them, I guess, or if they're enforced, not to sound too salty.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, speaking of Formula One, and yeah, I think any dominant period, well, any sport where the sense of jeopardy and unpredictability is diminished, obviously loses some of its luster. But do you have a driver or a team that you've historically tended to favor or follow?
Yeah, yeah. I guess luckily now I've always been a fan of Verstappen, mainly because when I first started watching Formula One, it was in 2016. Verstappen was the new guy on the block in Red Bull, and I just remember that 2016 Brazilian Grand Prix when it was pouring it down, and that one move on Nico Rosberg from the outside of turn three, that will forever stick in my mind as the moment I'm like, yeah, Verstappen is the guy, and that's who I've chosen to follow throughout these years, and now it's paying off. But even I can say, as a Verstappen fan, it's always good to have competition, and I think 2021 proved that. I don't think many people, even yourself potentially, would have minded Verstappen winning that championship, but as long as it was fair and it was a good fight, and it was a really good fight, it's just a shame how it ended.
Interesting. Fun fact, I was actually at that Brazilian Grand Prix in 2016. I'd just moved to Brazil
Oh,
for a
brilliant.
couple of years. Yeah, yeah. It was more miserable and wet than it looked on the TV. But I happened to be on the back straight. So I did see, try to crane my neck, the exit to turn 4, and then essentially just before. So exit to turn 3 and,
Oh,
and the entry
fantastic.
to turn 4. So yeah, it was an incredible day, albeit I think they'd stopped the race. So it did feel like it lasted for a long time. But yeah, absolutely. It was a moment, a defining moment, as you say, in Max's sort of development and announcing himself again on the sort of world stage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it's really intriguing. I don't think we have not through choice, but we don't often have Max Verstappen fans on the show. And you mentioned 2021. I think you're right. For me, it felt like with 4 or 5 races to go, all was lost. And then Lewis put together a run of essentially 3.9 race wins. And then that sort of 0.1 or whatever it is at the end,
Yeah,
whatever happened, it got taken away. I believe it got taken away from him, but people believe what they want to
sure.
believe.
Yeah.
But it was an enthralling season, and to me, it kind of felt like, without being too hypothetical, my first season watching Formula One is 1994, which I'm sure predates your birth, but it was Schumacher, and it was sadly when Senna passed away. But it felt like the sort of season they might have had if that had, if he'd lived, and those two teams that were extremely competitive. So why do you feel? And I have a reason why I feel this way, but why do you feel relatively certain that the trajectory of Red Bull being dominant is going to continue for this rule set into sort of 2026? Is there something you've seen, or is it just sort of how you feel?
It's always difficult with these things because you can look at a car and it look really good and really interesting, and it turns out to be terribly slow. And I think the concept that proved that was the W13 and the quote zero pod. I think most people who saw that come out of testing thought that looks really quick and it's really different, therefore it must be good. And it turned out to be a terrible idea. But unless you're a Formula One aerodynamicist who's been trained in the field for many, many years, you can't just look at a Formula One car and instantly understand what's going on. They are the most complex machines aerodynamically that you can in any sporting sense. And you can't just have one person understand the entire car. So I don't think you can look at something like the RB20 and think, oh, that's an advantage locked in for years. But seeing how the RB18 performed and then the RB19, and now we've got this RB20 that looks completely different to last year's car. It does put a certain fear in your mind that they were so good last year and now they've changed concept to this new car. They must have found something, and that is the concern that their dominance may continue until 26 or potentially further.
Yeah, I mean, certainly my assumption is that until the new engine regulations, that even beyond Red Bull look like a slam dunk to continue to win championships. I guess the only things that can bring them down are their second driver if things get tighter, or personnel issues. And we see that there are some tensions between Jos Verstappen and Christian Horner, and then of course the investigation into Christian Horner, which is I think concluded on the day of recording. My question to you, I suppose, is linked to what you just said about things looking fast to the eye. Well, the W13, if I'm not mistaken, looked fast in the wind tunnel or in the simulations. And it was only when they got to the track that they realized they had all the porpoising and the bouncing and so on and so forth. So, obviously Formula One is in your future, not in your present, but how is it possible that you can get that sort of calibration between simulation and reality so wrong? What are the sorts of things you think had happened for that to occur?
Oh, it's a fine art between simulation and track testing. It really is. And even the jump from CFD to wind tunnel is massive. You could find a massive gain in CFD, put it in the wind tunnel, and it to be a loss. It can happen. CFD is just a very rough estimate of what's going to happen. It's It's nowhere near as reliable as a wind tunnel, and the wind tunnel is nowhere near as reliable as the track. So every single team is only going into testing or round one with an estimate of what their car is going to do. No one gets to the track and knows, okay, our car's going to perform 100% like this. Some teams may be closer. Red Bull may be 98% certain, and you may get a Williams that is 92% certain. You may even get Mercedes, who were 97% certain that their concept was going to work with the zero pod, and then get to the track, and then that 3% slips in, and that be the percentage error that then gives them all of these issues. But again, I don't think, again, just need to quote, I've never seen CFD of the W13. Like, no one can know just by looking at it, but I'm guessing the side pod had nothing to do with their porpoising issues that year. It's the ground interaction of those cars is very complex, and it's very difficult to model in CFD. And that error that creeps in naturally from CFD, on top of these new ground effect cars that came in, that's what really happened there.
I think for us lay fans, it took us about 18 months to distinguish between a lack of side pods and the porpoising issue. And I suppose, one variable is the accuracy of these different techniques, CFD, wind tunnel, track testing, and then the other variable is cost. And we know that, well, not least in Formula One, there are explicit limitations on the amount of time you can do for each one. But clearly, track testing will cost you more than wind tunnel, and so on. CFD will be cheaper than that. I guess reversing that back to your day job and thinking about road cars and sports cars, is there a great deal of ground effect at play with those cars, or is there an attempt to avoid that for a variety of reasons?
For some sports cars, yes, there is certainly a ground effect element, and all ground effect is just utilizing ride height and designing your underfloor to be suited within a certain window for your ride height. That's all ground effect is. And I think there's been a bit of a misconception where the old Formula One cars of 21 and before weren't ground effect cars. They were still ground effect. The front wing is in ground effect. That's how you design these components. The only difference from 21 to 22 is that the floor, being the main downforce generating component, is now also in ground effect. And that does translate a little bit to road cars. For instance, some of for T50 and T50S, we have the underfloor isn't flat, therefore it would be a ground effect car. But we didn't have the deployable side skirts that then made that ground effect even more enhanced. So there is a certain crossover between motorsport and automotive. It's just it can be very small, and it tends to be very small for the larger SUVs, but there does tend to be a bit more crossover for sports and hypercars.
Yeah, I mean, I tend not to be able to go through an episode without mentioning the fact we had Mario Andretti on the show, and on his most recent appearance with us, he talked about innovating that ground effect with Lotus. And you talked about the skirts. Like that car had, at least in one iteration, the sort of brushes along the bottom of the skirt to almost rub the floor to maximize that sort of, or minimize even that distance. Yeah. And to talk about ground effect super quickly, when I got into Formula One, ground effect was absolutely, or the floor and skirts were a no-no because of the death of Gilles Villeneuve in the 80s. Given, I suppose, the change in pressure coming up behind the back marker and going over a crest led to his car sort of flipping in the air. Such was the power of, or the sudden change in ground effect that caused him to have his accident. So yeah, you can see how powerful these effects are. Absolutely. So here's a question. You're an aerodynamicist. Clearly, you've got a technical background, but presumably you've got an eye for this. Are there some cars that perhaps you would say are, the most aerodynamically, aesthetically pleasing that you've come across in your life or in your career? What would you say if you could have one or two cars in your garage? Which ones would you pick?
It's a really difficult question. I guess basing off pure, just thinking aerodynamically, I'm a real big fan of the Peugeot 9X8, the wingless wonder. I think it's a brilliant concept. It's unfortunate it didn't really work out too well. But the WEC rules for having a limit on your lift coefficient is fantastic, and then it's up to you to get there. And Peugeot had this fantastic idea of pretty much doing what Formula One is doing at the moment and putting all of their eggs in the floor basket and getting rid of the rear wing to try and get a drag benefit, which I think was fantastic. It's a shame it didn't work out too well, but I'll always love that car. And another one, I guess, has to be the BT46 fan car from the Swedish Grand Prix. Again, work of Gordon Murray. Again, it's just another fantastic innovation, getting around the rules by having, I think it was 51% of the flow was used for cooling, and therefore was deemed legal. It's small things about motorsport like that I absolutely love.
Yeah, I suppose it's one of those things where if the rules say X and you achieve that, even if it was like, well, I wrote that rule, I didn't mean you could do that. If the rules they don't prohibit it, let's say, that's the ingenuity, as you say, the innovation in motorsport. And I didn't realize it was Gordon Murray that did that. What would you say are his most famous cars? Is it mainly that McLaren that won Senna and Prost all of those races, or I suppose the fan car as well?
Yeah, I think pure design wise and pure innovation wise, it's got to be the fan car. That's pretty much what he's built his entire automotive brand from. T50 has a fan, T50S has a fan. Very different functionality, but they're still there. Even the T50S, I think, is nicknamed Nicky Lauda, as Nicky won the race with the fan car. So it's a bit of an homage to him. So it's proved quite influential on his route into getting into automotive.
Yeah, and so just for my benefit and perhaps those listening as well, the fan was obviously, as you say, there's a cooling element, but was it sucking the air from under the car to kind of like, I suppose, suck it to the track, or like what was the fan trying to do?
Yeah, it was purely it's a vacuum effect, really. It was just evacuating the air underneath the ground, and just massively increasing that low pressure under the floor. That gives you that downforce.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes you wonder. I mean, Formula One is extremely safe these days, touch wood, and long may that continue. But the regulations are so stringent that I suppose there's not always massive room for surprise innovations. The Zero Pod was one. The dual axis steering from the Mercedes a couple of years prior was another. I'm trying to think, were there other, like, what are the major innovations that we've seen in the last few years? Beyond those, I can't think of anything. Anything that comes to mind for you?
I don't think aerodynamically there's been many since probably 2014. Obviously DAS was a big one in 2020. That wasn't an aerodynamic effect, but it was a really interesting concept, and I think it was a shame it was banned, to be honest. I would have loved to see the teams in 21 or maybe going further experimenting with that and trying to optimize that and make it better than Mercedes. That's half of the joy of the development race in Formula One, is someone comes up with an incredible idea, and then it's everyone else's job to catch up and innovate, try and make their idea better than the original. But apart from that, you've obviously got the F duct in the early 2010s. You've got the S ducts, but yeah, I think the largest visible change from the rest of the field is probably that W13.
Yeah, and it's not as though that did a fantastic job. I'm trying to think. It won a race, didn't it? It won the Brazilian Grand Prix. Yeah. Albeit Max had damage, and it was a sprint weekend, etc., etc. But yeah, it won a race, and from what I understand at the time, it kind of gave Mercedes too much confidence in the overall concept, and to stay the course, which then wasted the following season. So I may have oversimplified things, but perhaps winning that race was a curse in disguise. Who knows?
No, it definitely sounds a bit like that. It sounds like that Brazil race did put some false confidence in Mercedes' eyes of that concept. But it's strange. I don't think the only flaw with that Mercedes was the side pods. You know, the given that the floor of these cars are so dominant in how they produce downforce, it has to be something with that floor. And there was a lot of talk over they couldn't run the car low enough to get into its peak map because of the design of the floor, or whether there was something wrong with the suspension. But I think people over fixated on the fact, oh, this car is slow, this car has no side pods, therefore the no side pods is an issue. I mean, obviously, the whole grid has now kind of converged away from that no side pod idea from Mercedes and more into like a larger downwashing side pod. But
Yeah.
still, you have to try these things. You know, if you're not constantly innovating, then you're falling behind.
Yeah, and in a way, like I wonder if there was an indirect link. So, for example, um, clearly no side pod means you have a certain, cooling deficiency that you need to make up for in a different way. Maybe, clearly Lewis talked about the driver position being too far forward. Maybe there's a link to that. There's a range of other things like I can't remember if this is quite right, but the way that Red Bull were able to put the gearbox in a certain, a certain depth or proximity to the ground, lowering the center of gravity, etc. Like there's a whole range of knock-on effects going right back to what you said at the beginning that you might find some, reductions in drag or increase in downforce on your side, but then other people from other departments then have a problem they need to solve.
Yeah, exactly. And for the guys who are working in aero in F1, they're quite lucky in that sense because at the end of the day, aero is king in Formula One. I feel bad for the guys who are working in suspension. I bet all of their hard work coming up with this fantastic concept for managing roll, pitch, however, has been destroyed by an aerodynamicist coming across and said, "I want the wishbone to look like this."
Yeah.
So aerodynamics is king in Formula One, and it's exactly what you said. That packaging the gearboxes has massive effects on how you can package the underfloor, how aggressive your diffuser can be, etc. So there's always knock-on effects, and there's always compromises between departments. And in automotive, styling tends to get the final say, but in Formula One, the aero guys tend to get the final say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming towards the end of the episode here, but like here's a really basic question because I'm, again, not massively technical when it comes to cars, other than just watching Formula One for a while. When I was growing up, right, cars were basically brick shaped. Yeah, that sounds like an exaggeration, but maybe there was a kind of a concave angle between the bonnet and then the kind of windscreen, and then it kind of flattened off for the roof, and then it went down at the same sort of diagonal, and then it was flat at the back. What has allowed, is it market forces that people want a car that looks sleek, and is it that it's cheaper to produce bodywork that is more voluptuous, for want of a better word, or more exciting? Why have cars from, let's say, 1990 to 2020 changed in their designs so much from an aesthetic perspective? What would you say that's down to?
Yeah, it's really interesting seeing that natural progression from late 90s to now. I think the major one is still probably yet to come with the rise of EVs. I think you'll see a massive shift in how cars look when EVs are hopefully not mandated in the UK anyway in 2035. Or I'm not sure if that's just a diesel ban. I'm not too sure. But you'll definitely see a massive shift in how cars look when EV becomes the norm. In terms of 90s to now, it's probably a lot. I've not really worked in manufacturing very much, but I assume it's now a lot easier to make curvy panels than it probably was back in the 90s. But I think the major one is just the emphasis on how important getting range is now. And aerodynamics is the main factor in range. Yes, you've got mass, but it's not as important. Yes, you've got your drivetrain and your drivetrain losses, but again, that's not that important. So it comes down to how drag efficient your car is, and then that's a massive driver on how your car looks at the end of the day. Then you've also got your consideration of how far CFD has come. In the early 90s, I'm not actually sure when Formula One started using CFD, but it would be before the automotive world started using CFD.
Yeah.
Not long before, but it would be before. And the advancements on CFD now has been absolutely huge. Even though it is just an estimation tool, you can chuck a design into CFD, see what it does, and you have some knowledge over what that design has done. Whereas back in the 90s, all you've really, or maybe even before then, all you've really got is wind tunnel. And that's a lot more expensive, and you can't just do multiple wind tunnel tests every day like you can do with CFD. So it's just, I think it's a mixture of the aim of the car has now dramatically changed. You need that drag figure, especially for EVs, and also just the sheer advancements in technology in manufacturing and also in simulation.
Yeah, I mean, I see the point you're making about range, but then I raise you the Tesla Cybertruck, which to me, obviously, it looks like something from a dystopian sort of film, which is cool, but that doesn't look particularly aerodynamically efficient. I don't know, but maybe you'll tell me that it is. I don't know.
Well, again, I've never seen it in CFD, but from looking at it, I would tend to agree with you. It looks like a bit of a brick. But again, these things can surprise you. You can put it in CFD and it really surprises you. Or you put it in the wind tunnel and it's even better than you thought in CFD. These things very easily do happen. I know Tesla quoted a CD of it. I think it was around the 0.34 region. Don't quote me on that. That's just going off the top of my head. Which for a car that size is reasonable. It's nothing will beating and it's nothing terrible. And they've managed to get away with it in that kind of in that styling methodology. So there must be some things that they're doing with the underfloor that you can't see. That's got some quite good trickery in order to get that CD down.
Okay, so I'm looking at that. You said 0.34. I googled 0.34 drag coefficient, and then the first link that came up was Tesla's Cybertruck claimed drag coefficient of 0.34 put to the test. So 0.34, when you say that number, is essentially a measure for the drag that occurs as the car is at a certain speed traveling through the air, presumably.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just a measurement of how drag efficient a certain shape is. One thing that is very interesting that I have learned through industry is don't always listen to what people are quoting on the internet. A lot of the time, it's their very, very best case scenario in a wind tunnel with every panel gap closed, your radiator flow being non-existent, massive assumptions that make the drag better than what it actually is. So that 0.34 that Tesla's quoting may be the proper figure, but it's doubtful. Just knowing what I've heard from just being around people who have worked in automotive aerodynamics for a very long time.
It's interesting. I feel like I've stumbled across a new kind of world. Like on Twitter, particularly if you're on Twitter when you're watching a Grand Prix, there's a heck of a lot of vitriol and back and forth. But I've now essentially stumbled across a variety of websites who are all arguing the toss about this 0.34. So, maybe that'll be good bedtime reading for me as I, try to enter the world of aerodynamics. So we're getting towards the end of the episode. I guess here's a question for you. You talked about sort of being a relatively recent graduate and the challenges of, or the persistence you need to enter the profession and so on. Do you have any advice to your younger self or to students thinking about following in your footsteps?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is luck. You can be extremely well qualified, and just on the day you didn't get the job, and that is the reality for a lot of people. It was the reality for me. I don't have a great CV. However, there are people that I know who are extremely qualified, extremely smart, and they just don't get the luck of the draw for whatever reason. So I think the main thing is persistence, accepting that you will get a lot of no's, definitely more no's than yes. And I think just having people around you who are in this very similar boat, just having people you can talk to and just kind of express how terrible it can be, because you'll never be alone. That all of your classmates in university will be trying to get jobs and will constantly be getting rejected until they get that one golden opportunity that has come about from as much luck as it is talent. So it's just having a really good network of people around you. They can be students, they can be people who are already in industry, just people around you who understand how hard it is, because it really is difficult. And I don't think it's spoken about enough, how mentally draining it can be, especially for new graduates. Yeah, the main thing is just having people around you to talk to.
No, absolutely. And I don't know why, but when you sort of talked about having people around you, I was imagining or recalling the story of Mr. Beast, the famous American YouTuber. And it felt, hearing how he made it to, I don't know if it's 1 million subscribers or whatever, he started basically with a group of people that were as passionate as him about making it on YouTube. And essentially that kind of net of people that, I tried this, it didn't quite work. I've had a really tough day. Nothing's working. Oh, well, I'm here with you. It sounds quite similar that, not to call you Mr. Beast, but essentially, that peer group of people that have a similar goal and who are going through similar experiences and that you can kind of swap notes with and get support from. Sounds like a fantastic piece of advice. Brilliant. Well, look, we have a final question to close the show because it's the question we ask everyone. It doesn't matter who you are. So to set it up, I'm going to just check. No one's ever said no to this, but I take it that you don't mind pizza or you like pizza, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, right. Yeah, it's a simple question. I might drop that pre-question, but I just want to make sure, there might be someone one day that says, I hate pizza. What are you talking about? But look, so you like pizza. Okay, so this is a yes or no question, right? Pineapple on pizza. Yes or
no? It's the age-old question, really, isn't it? I'm going to give that a big no. A big no from my point of view. I think it's absolutely revolting. I can't stand it personally. I've been very lucky to go to Italy, and my order of pizza definitely did not have pineapple on it.
Amazing. I feel like you built into that. Like at first I thought it might be a moderate no. Then it was a definite no, a revolting, definitely not. No, fantastic. Yeah, good. Well, one more for my team. Georgie is more of a pineapple on pizza, and I'm a no. So that's great. Well, Dan, look, thank you for being with us. Is there somewhere people can follow you, LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter? Anything people can follow your journey or reach out to you for career advice?
Yeah, sure. I'm on LinkedIn. Just Dan Morris. Feel free to drop a message into my inbox. I'll always do my best to reply, and always welcome to messages, whether it's for people after advice or just a general chat. I'm more than happy. So LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me.
Superb. Yeah. Well, this is the Dan Morris that works for Gordon Murray Automotive. That's working on for T33, etc., etc. Although it sounds like maybe you're working on some secret projects, and we'll have to find out about that next time. So guys, if you've made it this far into the episode, on whatever platform you're listening or watching us, please do give us a thumbs up, give us a 5-star rating, comment, come and find us on Instagram or Twitter. We're at Strip the Dip, and tell us what you think about the show. Give us some feedback and share the content. This is episode 7 in the books. We can't wait to have you back for episode 8. We've got 6 episodes that are already in the books. If you've not heard any of those, go back and listen to them. But until then, we'll see you next time. So, me, F1 Blag, and from Dan Morris, good night. See ya.